Magic fertilizer for all vegetables. 100% success results. Have you ever stood in your garden wondering why you did everything right and still ended up with tomatoes collapsing in on themselves, cucumbers curling into strange shapes, or vegetables that spoil far too quickly on the kitchen counter? Have you ever looked at a plant that you fed faithfully, watered consistently, and tended with real love, only to watch it struggle as if something essential was missing? I spent years thinking it was the fertilizer, thinking maybe I wasn't using enough, or wasn't using the right kind, or wasn't applying it at the perfect time of day. But the truth is far simpler, and far more surprising. Sometimes the problem isn't what you give your plants. The problem is what they can't absorb, no matter how much you offer. And this is where the story gets interesting. Because across the United States, from the rich, sticky clay soils of the Midwest to the fast-draining sands near the coasts, millions of gardeners are facing a hidden deficiency that doesn't show up on the fertilizer bag. In fact, soil tests often show that it's already there, abundant, waiting, sitting silently beneath our feet. That nutrient is calcium. And here comes the twist most gardeners never hear. Many gardens in America already contain more than enough calcium in the soil. Yet the plants growing in that very same soil are suffering from severe calcium deficiency. So the real question isn't, do I have calcium? The real question, the one that unlocks everything, is, if the calcium is there, why can't the plants reach it? And that question changed the entire direction of my gardening life. My name is not on any gardening textbook, but I've earned my stripes through 4 decades of trial, error, heartbreak, and more victorious seasons than I can count. I've gardened through scorching summers and unexpected frosts. I've planted in stubborn, heavy clay that clings to your boots like wet cement. I've grown crops in coastal sand so loose and hungry it swallowed every drop of water. I've built raised beds that thrived and greenhouses that taught me more in a single year than my first decade of gardening combined. And for most of those early years, I believed what many gardeners still do. Just toss some eggshells into the garden and give it time. I wish I could look my younger self in the eye and say, "Friend, you're going to lose many good tomatoes waiting for those eggshells to break down." Because the truth is, I failed again and again, not because I didn't care, not because I didn't try, but because I didn't understand how calcium truly works in a living plant. So today, I'm not offering you a quick hack or a trendy gardening trick. I'm offering you the one lesson I wish someone had taught me 20 years sooner. A lesson that transforms kitchen scraps into a powerful, bioavailable fertilizer your plants can actually use. A lesson that has saved countless tomatoes, strengthened every fruiting plant I grow, and given me more abundant harvests, season after season. And if you're willing to learn this with me, you may discover that the key to perfect vegetables isn't buying more fertilizer. It's unlocking the nutrients already hiding in your home. Let's begin. Part 1. Calcium, the most misunderstood nutrient in the garden. When most people think about feeding their garden, they think in terms of NPK. Nitrogen to make the leaves greener, phosphorus to help roots grow, potassium to strengthen the whole plant. For decades, even I believed that if I just balanced those 3 numbers correctly, everything else would fall into place. But calcium doesn't behave like nitrogen or potassium. It isn't a make the plant grow faster nutrient, and it doesn't work like a booster shot that delivers instant results. Calcium is something entirely different. It is a structural nutrient, almost like the bones inside a human body. Plants don't just use calcium, they rely on it to build and repair their tissues. Calcium forms the very cell walls that hold each plant cell together. When a plant reaches for sunlight, or when a fruit begins to swell in the vine, Calcium is the quiet worker that strengthens every expanding cell, helping the plant hold its shape, resist stress, and continue moving water and nutrients upward. And here's where most gardeners underestimate calcium. Without steady calcium intake, a plant struggles to transport other nutrients that you might be adding generously in the form of fertilizer. If calcium is missing, or if it's present but unavailable, the plant cannot move magnesium efficiently, cannot mobilize potassium, and cannot regulate moisture properly. Suddenly, problems appear that look like fertilizer issues, but are actually structural issues deep inside the plant itself. This is why fruits grown with adequate calcium are firmer, last longer, and resist bruising and rot. A tomato rich in calcium has stronger cell walls, which means it holds moisture better and doesn't collapse under its own weight. A cucumber with enough calcium has a crispness that stays for days, not hours. And leafy greens, when calcium is plentiful, wilting becomes far less common, even on warm afternoons. For many older gardeners, this matters even more than yield. We harvest slowly. We store vegetables for several days. We prepare meals thoughtfully rather than rushing. And we've all had the disappointment of picking a beautiful tomato, placing it on the windowsill, and watching it soften, wrinkle, or rot far sooner than expected. The reason often traces back not to how you stored it, but to how much bioavailable calcium the plant had during its life. Now, here comes the small but essential revelation. You can add all the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you want, but if your plant is missing calcium, or can't access the calcium in your soil, everything begins to fall apart. You see the signs long before you understand the cause. Tomatoes blacken at the bottom, a heartbreaking condition called blossom end rot. Cucumbers twist or grow with sunken patches. Peppers become soft and wrinkled before they even fully ripen. Sometimes the fruit tastes slightly bitter or lacks that satisfying sweetness, leading to debates among gardeners about soil balance, watering, or even the seed variety. But after many years observing the pattern, I can tell you with confidence, these symptoms almost always point to one single issue: calcium that never reached the plant where and when it was needed. The frustrating part is that your soil may already contain more than enough calcium. You may have added eggshells, lime, bone meal, or other amendments. But unless that calcium is in the right form, one the plant can absorb, the deficiency continues. This is why blossom end rot often appears even in well-fed gardens. It's not the absence of calcium in the soil, it's the absence of calcium inside the fruiting tissue at the exact moment the plant needed it most. And once you understand that, everything you thought you knew about fertilizers starts to shift. The focus moves away from pouring more nutrients into the soil and toward ensuring that the nutrients already there can actually be used. It becomes less about quantity and much more about availability. And that, my friends, is where our journey toward true garden health begins. Part 2. The eggshell myth and the harsh truth behind it. For generations, gardeners across America have held on to a comforting belief. If your plants need calcium, just crush a few eggshells and toss them into the soil. It feels natural, it feels frugal, and it feels right. After all, eggshells are made of calcium, aren't they? And in a way, that belief is rooted in truth. Eggshells are indeed rich in calcium, about 95% calcium carbonate, to be exact. On paper, it sounds like the perfect organic amendment. But here is where gardening experience forces us to let go of old habits. Calcium carbonate, the form of calcium found in eggshells, dissolves incredibly slowly in the soil. Not slightly slowly, not give it a season or two slowly, but painfully, shockingly slow. Under normal garden conditions, an eggshell can take many years to break down enough for plants to access its calcium. And in some cases, it can take more than a decade. I remember the first time this realization truly hit me. I was talking to an older gardener, someone who had been working the land since long before I picked up my first trowel. He told me he once dug into a section of his garden where he had buried eggshells 15 years earlier. What he found wasn't soft, broken-down mineral dust ready for roots to absorb. Instead, he found whole fragments, sharp, white, and nearly unchanged, as if they had been buried only weeks before. The soil had weathered storms, freezes, summers, and root systems, yet the shells remained stubbornly intact. And he wasn't alone. Over the years, I've heard countless versions of that story from gardeners in different climates. Dig a little here, dig a little there, and what do they find? Eggshells resting quietly in the soil, still waiting to decompose, still holding on to their calcium like a tightly locked chest. So it raises a question, an uncomfortable one for those of us who relied on eggshells for years. If your plant is struggling, if it's in the middle of fruiting and desperately needs calcium today, who in the world has 10 or 20 years to wait for that eggshell to break down? If the fruit is forming right now, and if every day counts, does it make sense to rely on a calcium source that moves at a geological pace rather than a biological one? That question alone begins to unravel the myth, because the truth is, the problem was never whether there was calcium in the soil. The problem was whether the calcium existed in a form the plant could use. Plants cannot chew, cannot dissolve shells, cannot break apart tough mineral structures by will alone. They depend entirely on soil chemistry, on what the environment makes available to them at any given moment. And that leads us to a far more powerful perspective. Instead of asking, "Do I have calcium in my garden?" the real question becomes, is the calcium in a form my plants can absorb quickly and efficiently? This shift in thinking changes everything. Suddenly, the focus moves away from throwing raw materials into the soil and hoping nature will handle the rest. Instead, we begin thinking like caretakers of a living system, one where timing, availability, and transformation matter just as much as the nutrients themselves. Once you understand this, you no longer rely on raw eggshells and wishful thinking. You begin searching for ways to make calcium bioavailable, ways to transform it into a form the plant can absorb through its roots, and even through its leaves. You start treating eggshells not as slow, stubborn rocks, but as valuable raw material waiting to be unlocked. And that is exactly where the magic begins. Part 3. The turning point. From calcium carbonate to calcium acetate. This is the moment where the entire story shifts, where slow, stubborn calcium locked inside eggshells becomes something alive, usable, and almost instantly available to your plants. If the first part of our journey was about understanding the limitations of raw calcium sources, this next part is about unlocking their true potential through a simple transformation. And you don't need a chemistry degree to follow along. You just need to understand the principle behind it. Gardeners and farmers around the world call it water-soluble calcium, or WSC for short. It is precisely what it sounds like, a form of calcium that dissolves in water and moves effortlessly into plant tissue. In the original state, the calcium carbonate found in eggshells, calcium is tightly bound in a rigid mineral structure. Plants cannot access it until nature slowly breaks it down. But when that same calcium carbonate is converted into calcium acetate, everything changes. Suddenly, the calcium slips easily into solution, travels through water, and becomes available for both foliar absorption and root uptake. To put it simply, the transformation from calcium carbonate to calcium acetate is the difference between potential and reality. The difference between a nutrient buried in the soil and a nutrient flowing directly into the plant's bloodstream. And this small shift is what allows us to turn common kitchen scraps into a powerful fertilizer with nearly immediate results. I often describe it with an analogy that resonates with gardeners everywhere. Think of calcium carbonate, the form found in raw eggshells, as money locked inside a safe. Yes, the money is real, Yes, it has value, but unless you have the key, that value never reaches your hands. Your plants stand on top of a treasure they cannot use. Now imagine calcium acetate. That is the same money placed directly into your wallet, ready whenever you need it. No waiting, no barriers, no years of slow decomposition. Calcium acetate is the plant's equivalent of having spending money in its pocket. And when tomatoes begin to blossom, when cucumbers stretch into full fruiting, when peppers load up with pods, that access is everything. And here is the beauty of it all. You do not need lab equipment or scientific expertise to make this transformation happen. You only need two ingredients: eggshell powder and vinegar, and a little time. The reaction between the two releases carbon dioxide and leaves behind a clean, water-soluble calcium solution that plants can absorb with remarkable ease. What once took a decade now takes just days. For gardeners of every age, but especially for those of us who have tended the soil for many seasons, this discovery feels liberating. It means that the calcium already present in our homes can finally serve our gardens the way we always hoped it would. It means we no longer depend on expensive bottles of liquid calcium or wait helplessly while our plants suffer. And more than anything, it means we understand our gardens not just as places of growth, but as places of transformation, where simple materials become nourishment and where ordinary actions lead to extraordinary results. You don't need to be a chemist to make water-soluble calcium. You just need to understand the principle, apply it with care, and watch your plants respond with strength, vigor, and resilience. This is the real magic of the so-called magic fertilizer. Part 4. The practical preparation, turning eggshells into a true calcium source. Now that we understand why raw eggshells cannot nourish our plants quickly enough, it's time to talk about something far more practical: how to prepare those eggshells so they become a powerful ingredient in our magic fertilizer. And the beauty of this process is that it's simple, inexpensive, and entirely doable in any home kitchen, no matter your age or experience. But it does require care and attention, because every step helps unlock the calcium that has been trapped inside the shell. We begin with one of the most overlooked but essential steps: washing and drying the eggshells. When you crack an egg, a thin membrane clings stubbornly to the inside of the shell. That membrane is rich in proteins, and while it's not harmful, it can introduce unwanted odors or bacteria if it's left to break down in your calcium solution. This is why washing with hot water makes such a difference. The heat helps soften and loosen the membrane, allowing you to remove as much of it as possible. And the cleaner the shell, the cleaner and more stable your final fertilizer will be. Once washed, the shells must be completely dry. Not mostly dry or dry enough, but truly, deeply dry. Moisture clinging to the surface can lead to mold or uneven grinding later on. This is why many gardeners place the shells into a paper bag rather than a plastic one. Paper breathes. It allows the shells to release moisture instead of trapping it. A paper towel tucked inside the bag can help absorb lingering dampness. And if you live in a humid climate, even the refrigerator, surprisingly, acts like a gentle dehydrator because of the dry circulating air. But drying at room temperature will only take you halfway. To get the shells into the perfect condition for grinding and chemical transformation, we turn to the oven. Spread the shells out on a baking tray and place them in an oven preheated to around 250 degrees Fahrenheit, about 120 degrees Celsius. Let them sit there for roughly 2 hours. This slow baking does two important things. First, it removes every trace of moisture, ensuring your shells will grind smoothly. Second, it makes the shells brittle, which dramatically improves the efficiency of the calcium extraction reaction later when we introduce vinegar. Some gardeners ask whether a stovetop skillet can do the same job. In my experience, the answer is no. A skillet heats unevenly. Portions of the shell may scorch while others remain damp. and a burnt shell releases an unpleasant smell and may hinder the conversion process. The oven, with its even heat and gentle drying, offers consistency every time. After your shells cool, you're ready for one of the most satisfying steps, grinding them into a fine powder. You can use either a coffee grinder or a small blender, and both will work to some degree. But after many trials across many seasons, I've learned that a blender often produces a much finer texture, especially if you tilt or shake it slightly during the process to keep heavier fragments from settling beneath the blades. The goal here is not coarse flakes or gritty crumbs. What you want is a powder so fine and soft it resembles baby powder, a dust that almost floats in the air. And speaking of dust, let me pause with a gentle warning. Eggshell powder is not harmful, but like any fine mineral dust, it's best not to inhale it. Grind slowly, open the lid carefully, and give the powder a moment to settle before transferring it into a jar. Respect your lungs as much as your garden. Once ground, store the powder in a clean, dry container, preferably glass, with a tight-fitting lid. Label it with the date so you always know how fresh your batch is. In this powdered form, your eggshells are now ready for the final chemical transformation. You've taken an ingredient that might have taken decades to break down in the soil and prepared it to become one of the most effective, fast-acting forms of calcium your garden will ever receive. This small ritual, done with patience and intention, bridges the gap between kitchen and garden, between waste and nourishment. And it's a reminder that in gardening, as in life, it is often the careful preparation behind the scenes that leads to the most extraordinary results. Part 5. The chemical reaction, the most captivating moment of the entire process. This next step is where the magic truly begins to reveal itself. Everything we've done so far, cleaning the shells, drying them thoroughly, grinding them to a fine powder, has been preparation. But now, we are about to witness the transformation that turns ordinary kitchen scraps into a powerful, fast-acting calcium fertilizer your plants can actually use. And the best part is, it requires only one more ingredient, something nearly every household in America has sitting quietly in a pantry: vinegar. The formula is beautifully simple. For every 1 part of finely ground eggshell powder, you will add 10 parts vinegar. You can use white vinegar, apple cider vinegar, or even rice vinegar. What matters is the acidity. You want a vinegar with a pH between 2 and 3, strong enough to react with the calcium carbonate in your eggshell powder, but gentle enough to remain safe and natural. This is the perfect environment for the chemical reaction that releases calcium from its mineral cage and turns it into calcium acetate, the highly soluble form your plants can absorb almost instantly. Now, when you pour the vinegar over the eggshell powder, be prepared. This is not a quiet process. The moment the two touch, the mixture will come alive. Tiny bubbles will immediately form, racing to the surface, creating a soft, foamy layer that seems to breathe. That bubbling is carbon dioxide being released, proof that the chemical reaction is working exactly as it should. It is almost impossible not to smile when you see it. Many gardeners say it reminds them of the volcano science project they made as children, the one with baking soda and vinegar erupting over a papier-mâché mountain. The same principle is at play here, only now the experiment is in service of the tomatoes and cucumbers you care about so deeply. As enchanting as it is to watch, this reaction also requires respect and caution. The mixture expands quickly, so never use a container that is too small. Choose a jar, bowl, or food-safe plastic container with plenty of space above the mixture. And whatever you do, do not seal the container. The release of carbon dioxide needs room to escape. If the gas is trapped inside a closed glass jar or a tightly fitted lid, pressure can build rapidly, and the container can crack or even burst. For older gardeners, safety always comes first. So treat this reaction with the same care you would use when canning or fermenting foods. Allow the mixture to breathe, but keep it loosely covered with a cloth to prevent insects or dust from entering. For years, I made this calcium solution in a simple mason jar with a piece of cotton cloth tied on top. It allowed the gas to escape naturally, kept the mixture clean, and gave me full visibility to watch the beautiful transformation inside. The bubbling usually slows down after a few minutes, but the deeper chemical reaction continues for days. It is the slow completion of this reaction, this gentle shift from calcium carbonate to calcium acetate, that creates the real magic behind this fertilizer. This moment, this reaction, is where science meets simplicity. And it reminds us that even in our gardens, places filled with soil, sunshine, and memory, there is room for a little bit of chemistry to help us grow stronger, healthier plants. Watching it unfold is a delight. But more importantly, it is a powerful step toward giving your vegetables the exact form of calcium they have been craving, sometimes for years. And as we move forward, patience becomes your next ally. The reaction may look dramatic at first, but what follows is even more important. Part 6. The waiting period, where impatience ruins what patience perfects. Once the initial bubbling settles and the excitement of the reaction fades, you enter a stage that many gardeners underestimate. It's the quiet part of the process, the part without drama or movement, the part that tempts you to rush ahead. But this stage, this period of waiting, is where the real transformation takes place. It is also, without question, the stage where most people fail. After combining your eggshell powder and vinegar, you must allow the reaction to continue for 7 to 10 full days, not one day less. Those days are not optional. The chemical conversion from calcium carbonate to calcium acetate doesn't happen instantly, even though the first few minutes look explosive. What you see on the surface is only the beginning of a deeper, slower, more meaningful process that unfolds quietly beneath the foam. During these days, the vinegar gradually extracts and frees the calcium molecules, binding them into a new form your plants can absorb with ease. If you interrupt this too early, if you use the solution before the transformation is complete, you will deliver something to your plants that is only partially useful, or in some cases, still too acidic to apply safely. This is why the waiting period is not a suggestion, but a requirement. And the question I often hear is, how do I know it's ready? Fortunately, the solution gives you clear signs if you know what to look for. When the reaction has finished and the calcium acetate is fully formed, the mixture will take on the appearance of thin, diluted milk. It becomes softly cloudy, no longer transparent, but still fluid and light. If you hold the jar up to the light, you'll see a faint opacity, as if you were looking through a weakly steeped tea with a swirl of cream. That gentle cloudiness is the hallmark of success. It should not be completely clear, because that would mean the reaction never truly happened. Yet it also should not be thick or gelatinous, because calcium acetate, when made correctly, remains a liquid. What matters is the balance, a translucent, milky tone that signals the reaction has had enough time to reach completion. This moment always brings me a sense of quiet satisfaction. It reminds me that gardening, at its heart, is a partnership between action and patience. We cannot rush seeds to sprout, nor blossoms to form. And just like those processes, this calcium transformation needs its own natural rhythm. It cannot be hurried by shaking, stirring, or wishing. Time is the ingredient that makes the recipe work. And here is where the open debate begins. I've heard gardeners argue that they used their solution after only 3 days and it worked fine. But more often, I've heard the opposite. They sprayed their tomatoes too early, saw little improvement, and assumed the method was flawed. In truth, the method was sound. It was their impatience that failed them. When I began teaching this technique to neighbors and community gardeners, I watched the same pattern unfold. Those who allowed the mixture to rest for the full 7 to 10 days always enjoyed strong, consistent results. Healthier fruits, firmer vegetables, fewer signs of calcium deficiency. But those who rushed the process often returned confused, asking why their plants didn't respond the way they expected. And my answer is always the same. Sometimes the biggest reason gardeners fail is not because they did something wrong, but because they didn't wait long enough. In a world that urges us to hurry, gardening reminds us that nature still moves at its own pace. This waiting period, quiet, simple, uneventful, is not a delay. It is the heart of the process.
And when we honor it, the reward is a calcium solution that delivers real, visible, dependable results in every corner of the garden. Part 7. Using it the right way. Because one small mistake can sabotage an entire garden. Now that you've created this remarkable calcium solution, the next step is just as important as the preparation itself: using it correctly. Many gardeners don't realize that even the most powerful fertilizer can become ineffective or even harmful if applied in the wrong concentration or at the wrong time. And because this solution is strong, natural, and highly active, we must treat it with both respect and intention. The first rule is simple, and I cannot emphasize it enough. You must dilute your calcium acetate before it ever touches your plants. The safe and effective formula is 1 ounce of your finished calcium solution per 1 gallon of clean water. This dilution ensures that your plants receive the calcium they need without overwhelming their delicate tissues with residual acidity. Using the solution at full strength might seem tempting if your plants look weak or desperate, but it is a mistake that can scorch leaves, damage roots, and create more problems than it solves. Trust the formula. 1 ounce, 1 gallon, no exceptions. Once your solution is properly diluted, you have 2 powerful methods of application, each serving its own purpose. The first is foliar feeding, and it is one of the most effective ways to deliver calcium directly where the plant needs it most. As you spray, make sure to coat both the tops and the undersides of the leaves. The underside of the leaf contains tiny openings, stomata, that can absorb nutrients more readily than the surface above. When calcium enters through these pathways, it travels quickly into the plant's active growth areas, supporting fruit formation, leaf strength, and overall resilience. The second method is the root drench. This involves gently watering the soil at the base of the plant, allowing the roots to absorb calcium through the moisture that surrounds them. While foliar feeding acts quickly, the root drench provides steady reinforcement, helping the plant maintain balanced nutrient levels throughout its development. Think of foliar feeding as a boost of energy, and root drenching as steady nourishment. Both are valuable, and together they create a comprehensive support system for your plants. But timing is everything. Applying calcium when the plant doesn't need it will not hurt, but applying it at the right moment can completely transform your harvest. The most critical time for calcium supplementation is when your plants begin to flower and when fruits begin to set. This is the period when calcium demand skyrockets, especially in tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, melons, and other fruiting crops. These plants are building new tissue rapidly, and calcium is the structural backbone they rely on. Without enough of it, blossom end rot appears, fruits become misshapen, and quality declines. This is why the best rhythm for your garden is to apply your diluted calcium solution once every 2 weeks throughout the flowering and fruiting season. This schedule prevents deficiencies before they show up, strengthens cell walls as fruits develop, and ensures that the plant never has to struggle or compensate for a lack of calcium. Across my many years tending gardens in different climates and soil types, I've seen one truth hold steady. Small, consistent care always outperforms rushed, desperate fixes. When you apply this calcium solution in gentle, timely intervals, you're not just feeding your plants, you're supporting their entire growth cycle with intention and wisdom. So remember, measure carefully, dilute faithfully, spray thoughtfully, and water gently. A solution this powerful deserves respect, and when used with care, it becomes one of the most reliable tools in your gardening journey. And as you watch your plants respond, stronger leaves, firmer fruit, richer color, you'll understand why this method has earned such devoted praise among gardeners of all ages. Part 8. Expanded applications: compost, worm bins, and soil types. As powerful as this calcium solution is when applied directly to your plants, its usefulness doesn't end there. One of the things I've always loved about gardening is how a single good practice can ripple through the entire ecosystem of the garden, improving not just the plants themselves, but the soil, the microorganisms, and the long-term health of the growing space. And this calcium acetate solution, simple as it is, turns out to be one of those rare tools that strengthens the entire system from the ground up. Let's begin with compost and vermicompost, because these are the heartbeat of many home gardens. A well-balanced compost pile is a living city of microorganisms, each doing its part to break down organic matter into nutrients your plants will later depend on. When you add a small diluted amount of your calcium solution to your compost pile, you aren't simply adding a nutrient. You're improving the environment in which those microorganisms thrive. Calcium helps regulate pH levels, making the compost more hospitable to the microbes that work hardest. It also supports the development of beneficial fungi, which in turn help break down tougher materials like leaves and woody stems. And if you maintain a worm bin, the benefits go even further. Worms rely on a balanced pH and a diverse mineral environment to digest organic matter efficiently. A gentle drench of diluted calcium acetate helps prevent acidity from building up in the bin, something that can stress or even harm your worms. The calcium strengthens their ability to process food scraps, resulting in richer, more nutrient-dense worm castings, the black gold of the gardening world. Healthy worms mean healthier soil, and healthier soil means stronger plants with deeper roots and improved nutrient uptake. But to truly understand how versatile this calcium solution is, we must look below the surface, into the soil types themselves. For gardeners living near coastlines or river basins, sandy soil is a familiar challenge. Sand drains quickly, leaches nutrients rapidly, and often struggles to retain essential minerals like calcium. In these environments, even if you add amendments, the soil simply cannot hold on to them long enough for the plant to benefit. This is where foliar feeding becomes an invaluable ally. By spraying the leaves directly, you bypass the soil's limitations entirely. The plant receives the calcium it needs without relying on sandy soil to store or deliver it. In contrast, clay soil presents the opposite problem. It holds on to nutrients very well, sometimes too well. Clay can trap calcium in forms that plants cannot easily access, even when the soil tests show that levels are high. Gardeners with clay-heavy soil often wonder why their plants show deficiency symptoms, even when they've added amendments year after year. The issue is not quantity, but availability. And once again, foliar feeding provides the simplest and most reliable solution. By allowing calcium to enter the plant directly through the leaves, you avoid the struggle entirely and give your plants immediate support. After decades of gardening across different states, climates, and soil conditions, I can tell you with confidence that foliar feeding is one of the most dependable shortcuts in the gardening world. When the soil works against you, whether too fast, too slow, too sandy, or too dense, foliar feeding steps in as the safe, consistent path to nourish your plants exactly when they need it most. It doesn't replace good soil practices, but it elevates them, ensuring that your hard work and careful amendments translate into real, visible health in every plant you grow. And so, whether you're feeding your compost pile, enriching your worm bin, or navigating the challenges of sandy or clay soil, this calcium solution becomes more than just a fertilizer. It becomes a versatile, holistic tool that supports the entire garden ecosystem. It is another reminder that in gardening, every small action has the power to contribute to something much bigger. Conclusion. Magic fertilizer for all vegetables. 100% success results. As we come to the end of this journey together, I want to leave you with something far more lasting than a recipe or a gardening technique. Because, in truth, there is no such thing as a magic fertilizer. There is no miracle bottle, no secret powder, no overnight fix that can replace what truly grows a beautiful garden. What we do have is understanding. Understanding our plants, our soil, and the rhythm of the seasons. We have the wisdom to notice when something is missing, the patience to wait when waiting is needed, and the curiosity to try again when things don't go as planned. Gardening has never been about chasing shortcuts. It has always been about learning what our plants are quietly trying to tell us. And calcium, as simple as it seems, is one of those lessons. It teaches us that health begins long before we see the fruit. It reminds us that what we cannot see often matters more than what we can.
And it shows us that when we give a plant exactly what it can use, no more, no less, the results speak for themselves. For those of us who have gardened for many years, or for those who are beginning again in a new chapter of life, this truth resonates deeply. Gardening is not a race. It is not something to rush through or squeeze between appointments. It is something to enter slowly, with intention, with patience, and with gratitude. We garden to observe, to adjust, to nurture, and, perhaps most importantly, to pass on what we've learned. Because every garden tells a story. It holds the memory of hands that planted seeds, the lessons of seasons that came and went, and the quiet triumphs that happened when we chose to try one more time. And when we share those stories, we give future generations something richer than any harvest. We give them the confidence to grow their own. So if you try this method, if you transform your eggshells, make your calcium solution, and watch your plants respond, do something for me. Carry that knowledge into the next season. Share it with a neighbor, a grandchild, a friend who is just starting out. Let your experience become part of someone else's learning. And if this simple practice brings you better tomatoes, stronger cucumbers, firmer peppers, or a deeper sense of connection to your garden, then return after one full season and pass the story forward. That is how gardening wisdom survives. That is how every generation grows stronger. And that is how we, together, keep the spirit of EverGreen Seniors alive. One careful step, one shared lesson, and one beautiful harvest at a time.